Hi, I'm Victoria. Well, first of all, I just have to say there might be a bit of an echo here because my mic just decided to die on me at the very last moment. So anyhow, I thought I'd make a video about making of this top my flow through with my work. A lot of people ask, how do you start? Do you design first? Do you make a pattern first? Do you see fabric first? There's various ways I start. I think a lot of creative people say the same thing. So I've done a little video about the workflow on this particular top, how to make a nice neckline and boat neck neckline and keeping it nice and sharp at the side on the shoulder line instead of sewing it afterwards with looking like a dog's breakfast. And also how to sew under the arm, keeping that sharp kimono look without it tearing, without it ripping. So I hope you enjoy the video, and also I decided to go down to the Sydney Botanic Gardens and do the photo shoot down there and give anybody that doesn't live in Sydney a little bit of a beautiful view of our beautiful Sydney Botanical Gardens. So enjoy the video, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. I'm happy to answer any question, anything you might be stuck on, sewing, pattern making. There will be more videos coming up, okay? Bye. Okay, so this is my rough toile that I have made from my very rough pattern yesterday. I do everything very fast, very rough initially, and I cut it out in a fabric that's the same as, or close as, to the fabric I'm going to be making my garment up in. And it's just the cotton knit. And the alterations that I have done from this are, I've lowered the neck a little bit. I love high necks. I love those high straight boat necks. But they're lethal to wear against my neck, probably because I'm getting older. So I've just lowered that a little bit there, made it a gentle curve. I've shortened the sleeves because they were a little bit long and frumpy, so I've shortened the sleeves about 3.5 centimetres, about nearly 2 inches. I'm going to lower the underarm about another 2.5 centimetres, that's about 1 inch. I'm taking it in a little bit here. It was a little bit uneven, so I've just raised the back a little bit. I'm actually going to lower it. I'll lower the table so you can have a look to see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to lengthen it about another 5 or 6 centimetres, because originally I was going to make this as a dress, as you saw when I was draping on the stand initially, but then I realised my fabric is white. The skirt that I'm cutting to go with it is a black georgette, and I'm going to gather up so it swings. It's beautiful fabric. But I only ever use natural fibres. I don't like synthetics. Rayons, cottons, but especially things like silk georgette, they are notorious for bleeding the fabric, especially if it's a dark colour. And I was washing it yesterday. I always wash my fabric before I cut anything. I was washing it yesterday and the water was black. And it bleeds forevermore. And I thought, oh, what am I thinking of? So I've decided not to make a dress. I'm making this a top. And then I'm going to make a black, heavily gathered georgette skirt, one that swings just below the knees. So it's more versatile. I can wear them with anything then. So I'm a lot happier about that. But anyhow, I'm just about to alter this pattern, and I'm going to cut it out of my fabric. So I will show you later. Bye. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut a binding, a concealed binding for the neckline. First of all, I'll stitch on the tearaway. That's why I've marked there. And then I'm going to, the tearaway is to make sure that it doesn't stretch. Make sure it's tearaway and not sew and violin. They're two very different products. Sew and violin has a grain on it and it is meant to stay in the garment, whereas tearaway is meant to be torn away afterwards, and it's actually just, it's made of like paper, essentially. Okay, so what I'm going to do to bind it, and then I want to just turn it over with a really narrow seam, and then I'll just do a 6mm or 1/4 inch stitch on top. And what happens is if I do the front neckline, then I do the back neckline, and then I sew the shoulder seams together afterwards, and it gives it a really lovely sharp point on the shoulder line. I'll show you a bit later. Anyhow, I did a test and I cut it 3 centimeters wide, but because this is gauze, it went, you know, by the time I stretched it, because this is how you're going to sew it onto the neckline, it's too narrow. If you're cutting it in maybe a cotton lawn or a linen or something like that, it's thicker fabric, so you can probably cut it at 3 centimeters, but I think I'm going to cut my new one at 5 or 6 centimeters. I'm just going to make sure that this is true bias. Well, actually, this is true bias, I know, because I've already cut a piece, but to cut it on the true bias, use the set square and make sure it's really good to have a little mat like this underneath, because it gives you your straight grain, all your lines. So just lining it up here, and then you can sort of see your weft grain and your warp grain. Make sure everything's straight, because if you don't cut bias on the correct bias grain, my goodness me, you'll have a lovely twist on your hands. It's horrible. It looks awful. Okay, so I'm going to cut this new piece 5 centimeters wide. Whenever you're marking on fine fabric, like, you know, in it, like georgettes or gauze or anything like that, always make sure that you use the pencil or your marking chalk as, you know, softly as you can on this. If you're using a pencil, use it on the side. Never like this, because you end up pulling the fabric. Okay. Oh my goodness. And my neckline is about, let's measure it. It's about 17 centimeters. So I know that my binding is not going to finish 34 centimeters because it'll stretch out. So but I'll make sure it's around about 30 centimeters long. So there should be a bit here. Okay. And also make sure you cut inside your chalk or pencil line. You don't want to have that on your garment, especially if it's white or a light colour. So this is much better. So by the time I stitch it onto my neckline here, so I've now got room for a seam allowance of around about 6 millimeters, about 1/4 inch. So I'll stitch that on, and then turn it over. I'll pin stitch it, and see I've got room to do my 1/4 inch stitching at the back through there. If you want to be, you know, do couture, you could hand sew that, but it's a gruesome exercise. Okay, so I'll show you a little bit later when it's finished. Okay, so you can see that I've stitched on the tearaway onto the neckline here, and I've done it onto the back as well. This is the front. So what I'm doing now is I'm just pinning on the bias. This is the gauze bias that I cut earlier, and I've just folded over and pressed it, and then I'm pinning it onto the right side. Notice that my stitch line is probably only about 5 millimeters, just under 1/4 inch from the edge. And when I stitch the binding onto it, when I place it on, just give it a very light piece of, a light tension, okay? If you relax it and pin it on just like that, it's going to be all buckling and all loose, and what will happen is it's not going to give, you need the tension to keep your neckline nice and straight, and then when we sew them together, we'll get this lovely sharp edge here at the side, this sharp V. So I'm going to make sure that I pin it on with just a little bit of tension. And then when I sew it, so when I actually stitch it, I'm going to be stitching just past that line, because if I stitch on the line or inside that line, that row of stitching, when I tear it away and when I fold the binding back, you're still going to see that row, and it can be a little tricky to get rid of. So just make sure that whenever you're stitching, tear away to the edge of anything, just stitch it quite close, but maybe about 4 or 5 millimeters, just under 1/4 of an inch. So now I'm going to stitch this on, and then I'll show you when I come to sew the back piece. Here you can see I have cut a little piece of fusing for under the arm. So this is the sleeve that's going to be folded back, and then this is the side seam here. But when these are stitched together, the front and the back, the stitching line comes up here into the corner and sharp. I mean, I could have made this a rounded line, but I actually like really sharp angles under the arm when I'm doing a sort of a kimono style. It's just the thing that I like. And so once I've stitched this here and stitched this, I'm going to double stitch in that corner to reinforce it, and then I'm going to cut right into the corner. And it does make it a weak point, and so what I do is I fuse it. Well, actually I fuse it with woven fusible interlining, and then I'll cut another piece and fuse on top of that again. And it's just to make sure that this is strong, because once it's turned back, it does become a weak part. As I say, I could have made this a curved under the arm, which makes it, you know, a little stronger, but I like that sort of sharp kimono sort of look. And also that when you're fusing, always use a piece of, oh here, have I got it here? I'm hand holding the camera at the moment. I'm using a piece of silk organza. Now you could use calico or anything like a fine natural fiber. Never ever ever use synthetic, because it will singe, the iron will singe it. So I always favour keeping a piece of silk organza aside. And also I always make sure that I write on it, because I use this over and over again. I always make sure that I write on it non-sticky side up, so I know that this is the side that I always put down and fuse. Otherwise I'll have my iron covered in fusible interlining, and it's a horror to try and clean. So I put it on the hottest setting of the iron, and no steam. Don't steam. Don't ever use steam when you're using fusible interlining. I don't know, there might be some brands out there that you can use steam, but really you're adding water to something that doesn't need it, just needs really hot heat. Just going to, I fuse one piece and then I just put another piece on top and fuse that. I don't fuse them both together. Just keep testing it to make sure that it's actually fused. I don't leave the iron on too long in case I burn my garment. Yeah, it needs a little bit more. I used to have a fabulous ulna press, but you don't really need an ulna press when you're doing something like this. Yes. Okay, so that's nice and secure, so I can go and stitch over that. So I do this for every corner, and I know it's a little bit of a a faff, but at least I know that that's going to be a strong point. And being under the arm, you're always lifting your arms up or you're moving your arms, it becomes a weak point. So I'm happy now. Okay, so I thought I would show you a close-up of this top before I finish off this video, because I just wanted to point out the neckline, which is what I was talking about when I first started this top, how I like to make the back neckline and the front neckline. I make those up separately, and then I stitch the shoulder line so that you get that lovely sharp edge, the sharp V on the right on the shoulder line there. I mean, if you try and do this all in one row, you'll have this horrible buckling right at that point there, and this is a really nice line. I like to sort of have mine gently curved, but I mean it looks lovely if you have almost a straight boat neckline, but I actually find them lethal against my neck. So I thought I would just show you the silhouette. And also, if in this pattern, I mean, this is not the easiest, this looks like a simple pattern, but it's actually not. It's quite a tricky pattern to make. And if you're sort of a bigger busted person, you might like to put a dart in there as well. But what I've done for me, usually on these sort of tops which are quite relaxed, I actually pivot part of the dart into the armhole, and then the rest of it I go into the hem, but then I don't always curve it up at the back. I try and keep it as straight as I can, especially if I've got a stripe that's coming straight across like this. But I thought I would just show you how it looks on me. It's a really lovely top, a lovely silhouette to wear on a variety of sizes, whether you're a skinny or a curvy. Okay, there's a top. Okay, so I'm just about to cut out my black georgette skirt. It's going to have gathers from the hip down, and I'm using two layers of georgette to be gathered together, and then one layer underneath that, just because it's quite a diaphanous sort of fabric, so a little bit too see-through, so it needs another layer which is going to be flat underneath. Well, flat but still quite flared, because I still want a similar volume to the hem. I want it to sort of flow. But I thought I'd show you how I'm going to do my gather. I'm just doing a test here. Oh, actually, before I show you, I'll measure this. This is 67 centimeters. It's oh, hang on, that's my metric. I've got for my American friends, I've got an imperial as well. So this is 68 centimeters, which is about 26.5 inches. And most of the time it's going to be probably around about 5 or 6 to 1 if I want it really heavily gathered. So I'm going to, so it's a 68, and then I'm going to gather it in. I'm using 3 rows. In fact, if you look at another video on my my YouTube site here, I've actually got a more detailed video on how to gather. But I'm using 3 rows because it always gives you a much tighter measurement and much more even. Because if you just have the 1 row, it's very hard to gather up, and it just doesn't stay where you want it to. Whereas this you can sort of see as I'm gathering, it's holding straight away. And I've got my iron ready to steam everything after I've gathered it up. But I'll gather it up and then decide if I'll give it a bit of a steam, and then I'll decide if I like that sort of fullness, and then I'll know how much to use for my skirt. See, it's wonderful. When you use 3 rows, it's wonderful. It just holds there straight away. Whereas if you're using 1 row, it is very hard to keep it stable. So the only thing is, if you've got a lot of fabric you want to gather up, make sure that your bobbin is full. Or keep checking your bobbin after every row, because there's nothing more infuriating than running out, especially near the end of a gathering row. Okay, so this here, this might be a little bit too much actually for what I want. See how lovely it sits? Sorry, I live on a very busy road, so you can probably hear the traffic outside. Okay, so what does this measure? This measures, let me get my tape measure. This is 68. That's 36. If I can get it down to maybe. See, it makes life so much easier. Also, I'm cutting in the direction of the way the skirt's going to sit. So in other words, this is my selvage here. My skirt's going to be cut down this way here, parallel to the selvage. Don't don't gather it across unless you've got a border print and you need to gather it that way, but it sits much flatter going with the selvage. So 36, 18. Okay, let's test this here. Okay, so originally it was 68, and half of 68 is 34, and half of that, you know, my pattern maker, but my maths is absolutely shocking. 17, so that's a maybe just over a quarter, so that's 8 inches, 8 inches. Okay, let's have a look at this. So it's not quite a quarter of the original measurement. I put a few more pins in there just to hold it. I put a lot of pins in because I use a lot of tension with my fingers as I'm steaming. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, let's have a look at this. Don't press directly on top, just hover just above the gathers and pull. See, I've got a lot of tension on here, I'm pulling. Okay, and then just see, it flattens out. It looks lovely. And there is nothing nicer than gathering silk chiffon or silk georgette in this case. You can't get this with synthetics. I think that looks lovely. Great. Oops, sorry, I've just moved my phone. Might just leave that. Okay, so I'm holding it up to the light so you can see I haven't got it really, really tight. I didn't want it really tight. So that's, that was 68 centimetres, I think 26 inches we said, gathered into, well, it's got gathered into a quarter of that measurement. So it still needs, I'm going to put another flatter layer underneath, but that'll be lovely. Beautiful fabric. So I'm holding it up to the light so you can sort of see that it is still quite diaphanous. It's quite see-through still, not great for a skirt. So my measurement is going to be 4 times my upper hip measurement, which is about 15 centimetres just below my waist. Because this is 17 centimetres, so that's coming into a quarter of the 68 centimetres. And I think it's about, 6.5 inches, which is about a quarter of 26 inches, did we say? I did say I was bad at maths. Okay. I've decided to make this a really easy slip-on skirt instead of making a proper hip basket with a zip at the side. What I've done is I've just cut a piece of fabric around about 26 centimetres wide, and I've folded it, and it's the length. It's the length of it is actually just the width of my the circumference of my top hip, and then plus seam allowance. And what I've done is I've just folded it over, I've pressed it at the top, folded it over, and I've inserted some elastic. And the elastic, I put it around my waist, and it was just, and I just made it a little bit tight. I actually wanted to sit just below my waist. I don't like anything sitting above my waist. I think it's not as flattering. And what I've done is I've pinned it at regular intervals, and then I'm going to stitch along here, and then I'll show you what I've done. So that way it just makes it a really easy slip-on skirt. So what I'm doing now is I've gathered up my skirt, and before I stitch it onto my hip basque, this is my section, my hip basque that I've stitched. I'm going to stitch it onto here. So this is my waist and this is my hip, so it's quite flat, and then the skirt's going to fall from here. And so I just need to make sure that, to make it easier to sew and for it to look a lot nicer too, I'm going to pin, as I've shown before, I'm going to pin it onto my ironing board. This is where you need a really good cover on your ironing board too. You need something that's got good padding underneath for steam and things like this. And I'm going to pull really tightly to flatten out this puffiness here. Probably see a white mark, that's my center. Oh, I just knocked the camera, sorry. That's my center front right there. I've marked it in a chalk. So I've evened out the gathers as much as I can. Okay. So what I'm doing now is I'm trying to make sure that the gathers as even as possible. Might need another pin here actually. Looks a little flat. I've got 2 layers, so it makes it a bit tricky. Make sure your iron is hot and full of water. Okay. See, I'm pulling it really tightly, so that's why you need to have a lot of pins there dug into you. Oh. And as I said before, I'm just hovering above the gathers. And wait till it cools down. Just, you can use your hand like that, just to smooth them over. Just hold it, just brush with your hand. Make sure you don't have oily hands or hand cream on, you'll damage your fabric. And do the same here. So see how it flattened it out a little bit over there, much at the top here? This is much better, much easier, much nicer. The reason it's really fraying quite a bit here is because I've actually ripped the fabric across the weft grain. I didn't cut it. Because these are just rectangles I've gathered up. So it's always nicer to rip your fabric first as opposed to cutting it. Or otherwise just do a snip and then pull along and cut. Okay. So here I'm showing you the yoke, which is what I was talking about before, where, you know, originally I was going to make it a proper hip basque, and then I was going to put a zip into the left side seam, but I thought, oh, it's a lot of work. And quite honestly, I actually just wanted a skirt that I could just pull on, you know, travel with, and it's just easy skirt. So this is actually just, the measurement at the top is actually my hip measurement, plus about 3 or 4 centimetres just for a bit of ease. And then it's about, I think that's about 9 centimetres long. But all I wanted was something that was just high and long enough, but just above my top here. See, so my top is sitting about 1.5 centimetres below that. So it's a nice look, isn't it? And then I've got a skirt to wear separately, and I've got a top to wear separately. So all I did is I folded the elastic, stitched it, I steamed it, then I put the elastic up and stitched it with 3 rows, and then I stitched the lower skirt, the 2 layers of lower skirt, and then overlocked it at the top there. I think you serged it. I think the Americans call it serging, and then pin stitch on top of that. So it just makes it's an easy skirt to wear. And this here is the wide 6 or 7 centimetre hem. It's a nice look, gives it a nice expensive look instead of that narrow double rolled hem. Gives it a bit of weight, makes it look expensive, and swings beautifully. Well, it's an absolutely gorgeous day, and this is such a beautiful part of Sydney, so I thought I'm going to come down and model my new top in the Sydney Botanical Gardens. Absolutely gorgeous. I wish this were my back garden. I'd be a multi-millionaire if that were the case. So I thought I'd just show it off to everyone.